Hello, and welcome to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Siri Vincent Plough, and I'm so glad you're here. This is the show where I explore heathenry through a queer lens. We will be talking about traditional witchcraft, runes, folklore, and so much more. Join us, won't you, as we journey to the ends of the 9 realms and back. Welcome back to the Heathen's Journey podcast. This is a surprise bonus episode for those of you who are looking for ways of celebrating Yule or the winter solstice or any of these, holidays at this time of year and want to bring some more heathen flair to it. As I mentioned, I think in a recent podcast episode or perhaps on Twitter or somewhere. Anyway, I've been talking about this a lot. There are, in Old Norse, 2 full months of Yule. And it's this incredible season of giving and making sure that people have what they need and kind of teaching people all of the skills that they need to get through the long winter. These holidays are also kind of have an interesting underpinning of darkness running through them. I mean, Krampus has become very popular in recent years, but there's also Grýla, the Icelandic witch, Christmas witch. There are the Yule lads. There are, Huldra, I think, is the Norwegian kind of similar to Grýla hag of the season. And there's this kind of feeling of like there's all of this joy and laughter and warmth at the same time that there is some really deep dread about what the winter has to offer. I think that, now was for, people in northern climates, December is a very difficult month if you are living, close to the land and dealing with a lot of harsh climate. And honestly, there's a lot of death at this time of year. So there's a lot of grief mixed in with all of the celebration. And I think that that's really beautiful. As a goth bitch myself, I love to find the darker sides of things. But there are also a bunch of amazing kind of folk traditions that you can revive at this time. And to help me tell you about these folk traditions, I brought on my own teacher, Kari Tauring. She was a guest in the podcast way back in June, July, and she has a lot of really great ideas for how to celebrate these different times. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation. I think that it's rich and full. I will also be following this up with some blogging on my Patreon. And eventually on northernlightswitch.com, just about how I personally have been celebrating these holidays. I talk about this later in the conversation with Kari, but I see the turning of the Gregorian year almost as its own Sabbath. I love year-ahead planning. I love kind of digging into what this year before has offered us and what we are looking forward to in the future. So I'm actually offering a very different kind of year-ahead planning for you all this year. I am offering a year-ahead intuitive planning session. It's called a year-ahead reading on my website, but it's really time for us to get together, use tarot, use archetypes, use kind of our intuitions to figure out what are the different energies that you'll be facing throughout the year and how can you kind of plan ahead for those at this time. So you can book your own year ahead reading session with me. I'll leave a link in the show notes to my Acuity scheduling page. And I'm only offering these on Saturdays and Sundays between now and January 17th. So this is a really limited time offer. So yeah, you'll want to book, even if it's, several weeks in advance, you'll want to book out so that you can take me up on this offer. I look forward to helping you plan your year with uh, grace and practicality. All right, so let's dig into the conversation with Kari. I hope that you get a lot out of this. I know that you will.
And now we're recording. Welcome back to the podcast, Kari.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Siri.
It's been such a fantastic year of working with you. And I know that a lot of people were really interested in your work after the last time you were on the podcast. And I think that this conversation about, Yule, these holidays that come up over the course of actually 2 full months in our Nordic ancestry. It just felt a little bit more, right to have this be a conversation between the two of us. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. And I think if people who are listening live in or have lived in very northerly climates, they might understand why it is necessary to have Yule times, jolly Yule times, for 2 months, because it can get very bleak. So,
yes, that's actually a really great place to start. So, let's just do like a brief introduction to Yule for people who are maybe not heathens who are listening to this or who are just starting out on their own heathens journey. So we have 2 months of Yule in Norse times. And they start, let's just like kind of walk through like what the season looks like. It's really a season, not just like a holiday for us, right?
yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note, once again, that that there are only 2 seasons, winter and summer, and that winter starts with the month called Slaughter Month. And so that's when we're slaughtering the animals and we're making all the sausages and we're doing all the preservation of food. And there's a lot of work. We've been doing all the harvesting. We're putting up food for the entire village for the entire winter, and not just for the winter, but for the spring, because there's not fresh food to eat until a lot of times into June. So, it gets to, it's all hands on deck. It's everybody's working. We're doing all the wool work is going. We're doing all of this. And it takes everybody's effort, including the children, who are working hard at this. Everybody is working hard, doing what they can, because they're on the edge of a survival or not surviving kind of edge during the dark, cold winter times. So we start with the slaughter month, and on the Gregorian calendar that starts October 14th, and the symbol is a mitten for the Primstav. And so that just sort of is a reminder of, okay, get it together, everybody.
We need our mittens to be ready. We need our, we need to get all of that stuff out of storage or whatever we need to switch over.
Here's what's coming. Here's what's coming, So it's, it's the promise of cold times, where in April 14th is the summer side, and that is, a blossoming tree. And it's not that trees are blossoming, it's that it's the promise that trees will blossom. So there's this sort of a foreshadowing of the season in both those symbols. And so we have slaughter month, and then during the slaughter month, it is towards the end of slaughter month is when we do the alpha blot, So it's kind of, so people are like, so when did pagans celebrate Christmas? And it's really, that's kind of a funny question since it's a pre-Christian thing.
Right.
And also there is this long extended period. So the usually the moon after slaughter moon is called Yllir, which is one of Odin's names. And Yul and Yllir and Jolnir are all kind of etymologically tied together. So this is a time of Odin's month, and it's called the first Yule month. And it contains in it the winter solstice. So one of the things that your listeners might want to read more about is how our oldest ancestors used a lunisolar calendar. So we were marking the new moons and the full moons as they travel through the pillars of the solstices and equinoxes. So the solstices and equinoxes were seen as sort of pillars around which the moon did his dance, right?
And it's also, I mean, this is just kind of a thing that I do to get it in my head, month, moon.
Yeah.
You know, like I try to think about them as months, and then we have in our Gregorian year, we have the months.
Right. And they were named for as if they were supposed to be moons, but they have very little to do with where the moon is at. They have everything to do with math. So
yes.
So, and we had the two. So, in the first mathematically Roman Catholic, and was before Roman Catholic, it was the Roman calendar, the Julian calendar. The solstice was on December 13th rather than December 20th, as in the Gregorian calendar. So that the first Yule month has to contain the solstice makes for sort of an interesting year this year, because the solstice, the Julian solstice, is December 13th this year, or the new moon. Yeah, the let's see. I have to even look. It's still mathy, even if it's more visual. So the first Yule month can contain the solstice if we've started the Yule month now, if we're calculating on the Julian calendar that's the solstice. If we are going on the Gregorian calendar, then the first Yule month needs to start later on the new moon of December 13th. So it's really it's a funky year because it was it is one of those intercalary years that has a 13th moon inserted into it. Most of the time that 13th moon, or we often hear that 13th moon and have read about it in Anglo-Saxon tradition, that 13th moon is put in at summer solstice. And it's to line up everything with winter solstice so that everyone's on the same calendar again. And so I didn't do that, and I put my 13th moon in now. So I'm at the very tail end of my 13th moon. We just had the full moon, and the 13th moon in Old Norse is called, it translates to late moon. So between slaughter moon and Ylur is where I decided to put my 13th moon. And yeah, so I won't be starting my first Yule moon until December 13th. And then that puts the Gregorian solstice in that first moon. And then the second Yule month then is called marrow sucking month. Bone marrow sucking. because presumably we've eaten all the fresh meat and have all these bones. So I imagine bone broth was a big deal during the later parts of the winter. And so that puts the first full moon after the first new moon after solstice all the way into January 28th. So that juleblot, that is sort of the end, or the big a big blot that is talked about in the Nordic poetic sources and sagas and things. That puts it like earliest it can happen is January 5th. The latest it can happen is February 3rd. So it can be in that time. But we tend to think of Yule as happening in December.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that, right? So, like, first of all, like us, for those of us celebrating Yule now, like I know I was raised Christian, loosely Christian, but Christian. And there's definitely like a very big, like if you're in a Christian, like largely Christian country, like December is a big deal, like it's fun to have a holiday there. And then there's also the Wiccan calendar, like the Wiccan wheel of the year that places Yule on winter solstice. So I think a lot of people, as they were kind of transitioning into, either witchcraft or Wicca or paganism or whatever, they followed that calendar. But as heathens, Juleblot isn't on the solstice.
Right. And, honestly, we just don't have anything that is really sort of that we can point to and go, this is exactly how everyone did it. So
yeah.
in our community, in our heathen community here in Minneapolis, I guess part of the thing about living in Minneapolis, in Minnesota in general, is that we have so many immigrant groups that have continued their root culture traditions. And so we have the earliest sort of festivity that we look at is Krampusnacht and St. Nicholas Dag, or the St. Nicholas Day, and that is December 5th and December 6th. So we have like a Krampus society in Minneapolis. We have, heathen tradition of celebrating that as sort of the kickoff of the Yule tea, the time, the season.
Yeah. And Krampusnacht is so interesting too. I mean, that's really like, it's really much more German than it is Scandinavian.
Yeah, absolutely. German, Alpine, Austrian, and so Krampus is this has been popularized. I think most people know about Krampus now because it's become so popular in pop culture, but it's a dualistic figure that appears along with Saint Nicholas, who was a Greek saint. So it's very, very early Christianization that happened in those areas many centuries before Scandinavia was Christianized. So while they might have been doing their Krampusnacht, St. Nicholas stuff, we were still not doing anything with saints, pretty much. But it's this dualistic idea of there is this rotten, evil character that punishes children who were misbehaving, who punishes people who didn't get their work done, those kinds of things. And then this goodly character who says, we're going to reward the industrious and the dutiful. And really what it boils down to is that winter, like we said in the beginning, it was a time where you had to have it together, or you might not survive. You had to have all the candles made, or you would be in the dark all the time, right? You had to have all the meat preserved. You had to have all the grain put away. You had to have all the wool working done. You had to get things done, or that evil that is represented, of just the darkness and cold and the potential for death, is there. It's a very real presence, and it's personified that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting too, because it's not just Krampus, right? It's also Grilla. It's also these other figures who are kind of this personified darkness, or this personified, like, oh, you better, do your work right now, like help your family, be good.
Right. Yeah. Grilla, the Icelandic troll woman, and the Icelandic Yule cat that will come and eat up children who don't have any new clothes for the winter. If you don't get a new piece of new clothing on Christmas, then you'll be eaten by the Yule cat, which is really the onus on us as adults to make sure that children have what they need to stay warm, and that Yule cat as the frostbite and sickness that can come to somebody who doesn't have warm enough clothes.
Yeah. So I celebrated Krampusnacht this year.
Nice.
We had a lovely so one of our friends of the pod, Mead Fire Wellness, they are hosting a Yule Fest, which is all Zoom classes. And so I'll be attending a lot of them. I know that you're teaching a lot of the Yule Fest classes. But it's basically to kind of like bring some more light and cheer, and learning more about Yule and different traditions around Yule, in this very separate and quarantined and kind of hard winter. Like, this winter is already feeling really hard, and I'm a person who loves winter, so it's a big deal. But you brought on a guest for your Yule class on Krampus, Brody, who's a local German. Is he an immigrant, first gen, or?
No, I think his grandparents came, but he's Brody Dirks, and he is, as he was saying, he was more immersed in the Scandinavian traditions. And then later, when he lived in Germany, studying and got into his Bavarian roots, is when Krampus started to kind of be like, oh, hey, maybe we should do this. So with he is the Thule or law speaker of Volkshof Kindred, one of the longest running heathen kindreds in Minnesota. And they, with their children, they're a rather large group with lots of kids, and they do celebrate Krampus. Yeah. But I made up I was so nervous because I thought, I hope he doesn't think I'm doing anything appropriative here.
Right.
Dipping into your Austrian thing. But I kind of made up, here's an idea of how we could do a ritual for Krampus, because most of us don't have a community. Well, we don't have a community, and we couldn't gather with them if we did. And we don't have costumes, and we don't have, a lot of this stuff that they do. So we took a handful of birch twigs and strewed them out in the front of our front door, and then put out a shot of schnapps. So Krampus will have thought that he'd already been there, and the schnapps as an offering to sort of ease any kind of agitation that Krampus might have had at missing an opportunity or not remembering whacking us with his birch twigs. And then hanging some cowbells or jingle sleigh bells or something in the trees in the backyard so that he will think the Krampus parade has gone that direction. So that was my way of kind of creating a new ritual around sort of avoiding getting punished by Krampus. And then put your shoes out in case St. Nicholas comes.
Yeah, and that was really wonderful because so my dad grew up Catholic, right? So it actually felt really like ancestrally cool to put my shoes out and put toffee. I found like some little like individually wrapped like toffees and candy and stuff. Coins are the most traditional, but with how stores are right now, I just couldn't get coins in time. But I texted everyone who lives in the triplex that I live in. I was like, all right, if you want to be visited on Krampusnacht, leave out your little shoes in the back hallway, in the back staircase. And I will, you might find a treat in your shoes. So that's been really fun. And I think that I might keep, doing some of that stuff just to spread the cheer to the other people who live in my building. I love them all dearly, and they're wonderful. And I know that this has been a hard stretch for people. So a little bit of mischief is never amiss.
It's so important, and I'm fortunate because my neighbors across the street are German root culture and Swedish root culture. So I got some St. Nicholas candies in my shoes, which I did not expect. This is the first time. I think they didn't really know if I was doing Krampusy things. But I always get St. Lucy buns, Santa Lucia buns on after St. Lucy Day in the morning. Then their oldest daughter brings them over, and it is so sweet to be able to do those kinds of things with your neighbors that are just can it's something to look forward to. Like, even as an adult, I literally ran down and peeked out the window to see if there was anything out there, and it was it's nice.
That's a great transition into Santa Lucia and the Yule lads and all of that. So why don't we talk a little bit about St. Lucy's Day and some of the traditions around that?
Well, yeah. So December 13th is St. Lucy Day, or we call it St. Lucy Day, but it's a Santa Lucia or Santa Lucia. Comes from the Italian saint, and she was dedicated her virginity to Christ, and her pagan father wanted to marry her off, and she said no, and then they were going to, I think one of the stories, I have to double check, but they were going to burn her at the stake, and they couldn't get the fire lit, kind of thing. And then they plucked her eyes out, all kinds of things. You know how they used to do.
Yeah, how they used to do.
But before Santa Lucia came into the picture, we have an old tradition of Lucy Long Night, Lussi, which means a light carrying being, and she was a very vicious kind of. So the thing about it is really interesting is that while Krampus and Saint Nicholas are these sort of separated, one character is obviously good, one character is obviously wicked. In our older times, these were blended, more kind of subtle transitional things, and it was usually women characters or female characters like Lucy who would peer into people's windows to see that their homes were clean, and if they weren't, she might burn the house down, which of course is a myth, sort of folk way of saying they probably didn't get their chimneys cleaned out before they were lighting the winter fires, kind of thing. During this night, these nights, animals talk to one another. So all of the animals had been brought into the homestead, into the inn guard, into the home farm, literally into the houses in the oldest of days, because those long houses were heated in part by the animals that were brought in. So your sheep and your cows and things were right there with you. And this was the time when they could talk to one another and let Lucy know how they had been treated. If they had been mistreated by the humans in any way, she would just get furious,
Oh, cool.
So really a lot of really interesting, and so much of these wintertime celebrations have to do with maintaining good relationships with the core of fertility of the earth and the animals that we count on. Mm-hmm. Making sure those relationships are good, so there were so when Santa Lucia kind of came up, it sort of took over this season, and you see Santa Lucia is there's one of the girls in the village is chosen each year, and she dresses all in white with a red sash and a crown of candles in her hair. And then the other girls dress in white as well and carry a single candle. And then the boys dress as with cone hats with stars and moons on them and carry a star on the end of their long scepters. So you have this imagery that any pagan heathen person would see as obviously representing Suna, the sun goddess, and Mani, the moon god, in these kinds of costumes. And the lusikatter are these light cats that are buns that are in these swirls in they look like S. And so the rune for the sun is this S rune, the sigil, Saulus, Solo, and there are little raisins on the insides of the swirls that some people think are the cat's eyes, the light cat's eyes. And also, though, Saint Lucia has one of the things she has is eyes on a plate because of her eyes getting plucked out.
Right.
So also kind of represent that. So lots of stuff. And because that was the old solstice, this was the big festival that was happening.
Yeah, so that also makes sense to me, so talking about ways that we can celebrate the, Santa Lucia Day or the Lucy would be to, clean your home, obviously. That could be a good big part of it, as well as making those buns, choosing an appropriate person in the household to do that. You could... I don't know if I feel quite comfortable recommending to all the listeners that they create a candle wreath, but
Well, they sure do it. And so part of one of the important parts of the candle wreath is that the wreath most often had freshly cut greenery. So spruce, juniper kinds of wreath, so that any candle wax would drip onto the greenery, and also the greenery is fresh, so it doesn't burn right away if something wretched should happen. But you can also, there's lots of candles with the battery. There's candle wreaths with battery operated candles and stuff too. You can use that they oftentimes use these days.
Oh yeah, that's right. We don't have to go full old school.
Yeah.
If you wanted to, though, I mean, I think, making the wreath that day, right? You don't want to let it, if you're going to make your own, you don't want to let it dry.
Right.
You just want it to be, and you also want it to be like sitting at a good point on your head too, so that it doesn't fall over.
That's right. With the little kids classes that I used to do at Ingebrigtson's, I did lots and lots of little kids classes there, and at Norway House sometimes. We would make it out of paper, and then we could make the cone hats and the stars and the paper wreaths and stuff. So that's also an option for people. A little flamey type tissue paper on the top of a toilet paper roll is just fine.
Perfect. All right, so we have been chatting for a while, so now I will take a quick break for our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to the Swamp Witches. Swamp Witch Stephanie is an online magical herbal apothecary for all your darkest desires. Swamp Witch Stephanie started in 2018 with a line of anointing oils enchanted by the Swamp Queen herself. Stephanie has been studying the Western occult tradition, American folklore, British and American traditional witchcraft, and historical herbalism for over 10 years, and has brought her knowledge and expertise to each of these handcrafted, all-natural oils. And this year, Swamp Witch Stephanie has launched a new line of ensorcelled skincare products. And she would know. Being the drag persona of Marcus Ironwood, Stephanie knows the importance of keeping your skin soft as a babe's bottom. Stephanie is ready to share her magic with Heathen Stirny listeners with 20% off your order at swampwitchstephanie.com. Just use the offer code HEATHEN for your discount. Keep it swampy.
And we're back. All right, so so there's another aspect of St. Lucy's Day, which is the Yule Lads.
Right, and actually the Yule Lads precede St. Lucy by a day. There are 13 Yule Lads, and this is specifically Icelandic. There is no other Scandinavian culture that does this. This is very, very specific to the Icelanders. And they have 13 Yule Lads, and they start showing up on the 12th. And one shows up every day, and they don't depart until the 6th of January. So there are 26 days where you have to be conscious of these different Yule Lads. And their names are really descriptive of what they do. So the first one that comes is called the Sheepcoat Clod, and he is the harasser of the sheep, but is impaired by stiff peg legs. Right. So the first one is So the first one is it shows us the importance of the sheep. So we're talking about Iceland and how important sheep are. So watching out from that day that the sheep are safe in their little sheep cote, COTE. That's the little barn for the sheep. The next one's Gully Gawk, And he hides in gullies waiting for an opportunity to sneak into the cowshed and steal milk. So there again, you need to be really careful with your cows. So we've got the sheep and the cows being potentially harassed. The next one is called Stubby because of the abnormally short stature, and steals pans to eat the crust left on them. So here's one that we need to be aware of the fact that we need to make sure our pans are well washed. Otherwise, Stubby will come in and steal them. Spoon licker, that's a really good one. And steals this, it's called a þurr, which is a type of wooden spoon that has a really long handle, or a svara. And he steals it to lick it, and he's extremely thin due to malnutrition. So, again, spoons. Then pot scraper. So you've got your pots and your spoons and your pans, your spoons, and your pots. Pot scraper steals the leftovers from the pots. And bowl licker hides under beds waiting for someone to put down their oscar, which is a type of bowl with a lid that is used instead of dishes. And he steals the bowls. So again, it's you've got to be really careful with your dishes. And then there's door slammer, who likes to slam doors, especially during the night, which can maybe be a reminder for us to make sure that the door's latches are secure before we head to bed, so that the wind doesn't blow them open. Sheer gobbler or skyr gobbler. This is the Yule lad with an affinity for skyr, which I don't know if your listeners would know what that is, but it's a type of kind of like a yogurt. It's a type of Icelandic sour cream dish that is quite delicious. And
I love skyr.
Yeah, it's really, really delicious. And you can get it in some of the specialty shops. So there's one of the foods that are eaten during this time. He comes on December 19th and leaves on the 1st of January. Sausage swiper would hide in the rafters and snatch sausages that were being smoked. Window peeper is a snoop who would look through windows in search of things to steal. Doorway sniffer has an abnormally large nose and a cute sense of smell, which he uses to locate laufabröd, which is a leaf bread, which is a kind of really fine, lacy pastry. And then meat hook comes on December 23rd, and he uses a hook to steal meat. And then candle stealer is the last one, and he follows children in order to steal their candles, which were made of edible tallow. So tallow candles, he would steal them and eat them. So you have, so this is the last Yule lad that comes December 24th and leaves on the 6th of January. So you'll notice that no Yule lads come on Christmas proper, but they start leaving on the 24th, the 26th, the 27th. So there's that. The 25th is this sort of reserved day of everything's cool for one day. Then you got to be on your guard again, right? So to me, I just think it's such a fun tradition, a beautiful sort of tradition that really tells us a lot about what people's biggest concerns were during these winter months.
And I think also in order to, kind of like celebrate that now, if you have Icelandic ancestry, or you're just like, oh, the Yule lads are kind of cool, like how can I celebrate them? Or, like do any kind of working with them. I feel like there's so much here about like keep your house clean. Like cleanliness and tidiness is such a Nordic.
Do your dishes.
Do your dishes. Like it's such a Nordic cultural thing.
Yes.
And then the other thing here is that, you know, you could, on the day that, you know, Skier Stealer arrives, you could eat skier or try that for the first time. Or, you know, you could have lacy pastries on the day that one arrives, or, you know, like smoked sausages. Like it's, these are kind of ways that you can celebrate this now, right?
I might suggest leaving one of those things outside the house, for example. If you like left something outside the house, then maybe the Yule lad wouldn't come in the house and rustle around, you know?
Right. Like maybe he has what he needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and there are lots of really cool songs in the Icelandic tradition about these Yule lads. And one of them I think is so interesting. It's very, very short. Shall I sing it?
Yes, please do.
All right. Now, I use a staff because it is because it talks about a staff in it. And so let's see here if I can remember the words. Yola Sveinar pace the floor, thick walking sticks in hand. Their mother Grilla sweeps the floor and spanks them with her broomstick. On the stool, there stands my pitcher. Just 9 days before the Yule, I'll be among the humans. Yeah.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Very sweet little ditty. And it's interesting that 9 days before the Yule, there's a similar interesting song in Norwegian tradition about 8 days before the Yule. These little girls go up the mountain and find these little objects, and it causes them to dance. And that's called Opili, Opili, Opili. Stå lite kanna, att dagar fire, jul dansa jungfru Anna. Anna, Anna, da-da-da-di-dai, hantriam-pa-pandai, yallar-yandari-dallari-dai, yomper-yam-pa-pandai. So up the hill, there's a little pitcher, kanna, similar to what we heard in the Yule lad song. 8 days before the Yule, Anna goes up there and finds it and dances and causes her to dance. And so there's a variety of things that they find. So that's 8 days before the Yule, and this is 9 days before the Yule. And, you know, if Yule is going to be on winter solstice, then 8 days before the Yule is December 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 days before the Yule would be December 12th when the Yule lads come.
Yeah. That's really cool. I had not heard of the girls, the 8
8 days
ones who.
Well, they are. That's a song from Telemark, and it has Anna and let's see. Anna finds a kanna. Hege finds a tege. What else is there? Krossa. Åsa finds a krossa. And so I think there were 3 verses. I added a verse for my Karin finds a stav and the little staff. You know, they aren't magical girls per se. They are girls that go up the hill to find magical objects. So they can be any girls. But yeah, it's very interesting. There are quite a few Yule songs in Norway that they also have in Iceland, and I don't really find that as much. The song, there's a juniper plays a big part in both Norway and Iceland, and there's a song about the children in the children's circle dances, about going around a juniper bush, and the juniper being brought into the house is a way of protecting the house, keeping diseases out of the house. So that's something listeners could do, is get some juniper and bring the juniper in, and it smells delightful. So that's a thing. Another children's song is talking about, I went over land and sea. An old man came to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, I'm from Clapping Land, and everyone who can clap can be from Clapping Land. It's just they have that in Icelandic and Norwegian children's song tradition. And there's one about the Yule Svein, the Yule lad who is out in the woods, and a rabbit comes and says, "Oh, you need to let me in because a hunter is trying to get me." And the Yule lad lets him in because they're friends, and it's lots of really sweet things that we can play with children. Yeah, so those kinds of things, and the idea that it extends across 2 months is important. The first month in Old Norse is dedicated to Odin as the Yule father, and the wild hunt is part of that piece as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the wild hunt.
Yeah, and that is something that lasts all winter. It's not just something for Halloween or whatever. It's and it goes in these lots of different traditions around it. But this dark time of the year is when ancestors might find their way back home. So there are traditions around like setting a place for ancestors, or setting a high seat for ancestors to sit in, even on Yule proper, to leave the beds empty in case your ancestors want to sleep there.
Mm-hmm.
That they don't crawl in with you. Is probably a good idea. And so there's this idea that they are they're all free to roam at this time, and that some of those spirits that had died, were unsettled, is part of the wild hunt kind of concept, where Odin could be with his entourage riding through and snapping up the unsettled spirits. But also people who are unaware as they're out on the roads in these dark times. So the most important thing, you have a silver in one pocket and you have bread in the other pocket. If you have to walk out alone during this time, and if it's Odin that you hear, Odin's horse that you hear first, you throw the silver, and if it's the hunting dogs you hear first, you throw the bread. And it's said that anything below the shoulder of an ox is safe. So you want to get down as close to the ground as you can. If you have a cloak, it's nice to throw a cloak over your face, or an apron. You can throw your apron up over your head and just fall to the ground. And that can be, then they can pass over you because they won't see your eyes looking at them and be attracted to you that way. So those are some things.
That reminded me, I actually wanted to ask you about this. So I remember, oh God, I can't remember where I came across this idea, but there's this idea that in order for something to be used by those who have died, that you break it. So in order to leave a sword for a warrior to use in the afterlife, you would break the sword and leave it in his burial. And I can't quite remember where I came across this idea, but it's really stuck with me. And so to me, it makes sense that winter the winter side of the year would be the time when the restless spirits are out, right? Because, perhaps that is when, if something is whole in our world or in our home, that's something that we use. But if it is broken, it is something the spirit can use. Mm-hmm. So maybe winter is the time when everything seems green. Mm-hmm. To the spirits.
Sure. Like a opposite of what it is. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I like that.
Yeah, I haven't. I need to figure out again where I saw that. It might also be in some Celtic. I believe it might be some Celtic root stuff as well.
It's not something that I've heard of in Scandinavian culture, but they are restless. I think part of the reason that they're restless is because we have contracted our lives. In the summertime, we bring the cattle out to the upper farms. There's lots of activity outside, and so there are more intersectional points for land spirits and ancestors in the summertime. And then when we bring everything into the ingard, the homestead, and there's no activity in the outer area, that's why they are attracted, because they're attracted to where the activity is of their descendants, because most of them are ancestor spirit,
right? Yeah, or like the ancestor of the farm, the first one created it.
The first farmer on the land is usually buried on the land, and there's a mound there. And there were so there's the Haugebunden, the mound farmer, is offered the winter's ale as well. Brewing was an important part of the Yule requirements all the way into Christian times. There were laws on the books about how much ale each farm had to brew. And if there were 3 farmers that could get together and brew this much ale, and if you were a farmer that was far away, you had to brew this much extra. It was a really important thing. And the offering of ale to the mound farmer. So there's this song, the Haugebunden, people can maybe look it up on YouTube. Christian Brottenberg sings a really great version of it. And the mound farmer comes up, and it's Christmas Eve, and the farmer has brought the ale out, and the mound farmer is saying, so-and-so stole your calf, stole some of your, moved the bua marker, the farm marker, and this and that, and the ale giving farmer is saying, we're going to let it all slide because it's Christmas Eve, so it's good. And after they give the ale, then they go bring the greenery in. So this idea of bringing the Christmas tree in, or the boughs of holly or whatever, the greenery that comes into the house, that happens on Yule Eve day. So it's not like the day after Thanksgiving kind of thing.
Right.
And that's part of why they were able to put, when my mom was little on the farm, her dad would go out Christmas Eve day, and he'd go out to the woods and he'd cut a tree and he'd bring it in. And then they would have the actual candles lit on the tree, and they would dance around it in a slow, solemn circle. And these living candles on the tree, we think, oh, what a fire hazard. But it wasn't such a fire hazard because the tree was fresh. It was fresh, right, and almost might even still be wet with snow dripping from it, And then the mother of the household would put the candles on and light the candles. And it was a time where all the children, all visitors, everybody knew you had to be quiet and solemn and move slowly and carefully. And then they will form a circle, and the tree would be put in the middle of the room, and they would make a circle and they would sing around. And that is still done in Norway. Juletrefest. It's the Yule Tree Festival, and that's kind of still done. And then the second Yule month then is dedicated to the mothers or to the females. So that's more when you'll get the Frau Hola, or Hulda or Frigg, Mrs. Odin, sometimes they call Frau Woden. And that's sort of that balance of the first Yule month being dedicated to Odin and the second month being dedicated to Frigg. And that's where we get the Mother Night tradition of honoring the clan mothers. So we've had the Alfablot in the fall that honors oftentimes clan fathers, the male ancestors, though there's not any like super strict understanding that was that piece, but there is this understanding of the first Yule month being dedicated to clan fathers, and that we had to be really careful because they could get hurt, during that time. So extra special care was taken of the men in the household, so that, because I suppose part of it is that they're doing like pretty frantically dangerous things like hunting and chopping all the wood that we're going to need, and that accidents that are out that, and a person who is doing things outside was going to happen, and that the indoor pieces of spinning and cooking and those kinds of things that were typically done by the female in the household then had their own special dangers that then they had to be very well cared for and honored in their part. So then Mother Night, in our community, we do Mother Night on the Gregorian winter solstice, which is the 20th, 21st. And
I was going to ask about that. Because that is still like the way that we're kind of calculating our Yule months this year. That seems like it's still in the first month.
Yes. So, well, it is all very tricky, isn't it?
It is. What's all this math? I don't know.
I know. So let me just see here. So the first Yule month of Yule would be, if you have not put a 13th month in for 2020 already, you're in the first Yule month right now.
Okay.
And then the second Yule month has the solstice in it, the Gregorian solstice in it. If you're doing it the way that, so I'm adding a 13th month now, so I haven't started my first Yule month yet.
Right.
But we don't really know like what they did in the olden days. We in our community, we put Mother Night on winter solstice because it's like you had said, we're working in a post-Christian, new neo-pagan understanding of what things are. And so if we talk about Yule being Mother Night, being that solstice, winter solstice on the Gregorian, then that's just how we're doing it. And I don't know how traditional or not traditional. Yeah.
I think it's also just like okay to I think it's also just like okay to make decisions because we don't know.
Absolutely.
It's okay to just be like, well, it makes sense to me to do Mother Night on the solstice, or it makes sense to me to do Mother Night on New Year's Eve, or like whatever.
Right. Yeah,
whatever works for you. And then just keeping it kind of consistent and energetically in flow,
Yeah, and I think as Sarah Axtell would point out, these are things that we're supposed to do within the few or understood customs of our own family, our own families, and our own communities. And so this is something that has worked out well for our community. And so that's what we have been doing over the last 20 years. We're just doing it like this.
Yeah, and I love it.
Yep. So, so that the idea of a juleblot being all the way in January doesn't play into most modern heathen practices. For some obvious reasons. For one, because most people don't have an extended vacation time, right?
Right, yeah.
Things are based on it's nice to be able to celebrate the things when other people are celebrating the things, like Hanukkah and like Christmas and like Kwanzaa and like all of these festivals that happen approximately at the same time. It's nice to kind of get in on that whole vibe of everybody's celebrating something. So that's a decision we can make. And then having a juleblot. So blot is the sacrificial piece, and I think about the front half of Yule Tide as being preparatory and incoming energies, and making sure we're only letting in the right kinds of energies and doing the rituals, and that having a Juleblot in January on the full moon of the marrow sucking month would be something that I actually do personally. And it's something that I think is really important because we've been in this gifu reciprocity, gifting one another, gifting to the mound people, gifting to the Nissa, which is another one of those things that happens. We've got those little spirits of the barns and the outbuildings and the house that we need to leave presents for and things. And so this sort of is a final gifting for me in my personal way of celebrating. This is a final gifting to the gods, to that energy which creates all things, to that ultimate unseen understanding of how lucky we are to have made it this far through winter. Yeah. And then right after that then is when we really start to see and feel the sun, the days lengthening. There's this long dark period before what is in Celtic terms Imbolc, or when the sheep have that's another thing to take into consideration. The animals have been bred during the fall, and they will be giving birth right around the end of January, beginning of February, and that Imbolc is where the ewe's milk comes in, or it's that time where we start to see new life, we start to say that, yes, this dark piece is over. So that's just a sort of an extra part of Yule that I like. But it's interesting because saint days have extended throughout January, have extended requirements around ending Yule. So
yes. Yeah, I've been reviewing some of my Primstav days, just in preparation. I'm seeing, like, oh, this is the day when all of the last of the Yule ale needs to be drunk. This is the day when, all of the Christmas leftovers need to be eaten, and like all of this stuff. So yeah, it's a lot about like kind of wrapping up festivities.
Yes.
And it almost seems like a ramping down.
Yes. St. Knut's Day is the 13th. It's called 20th Day Knut. It's the 20th day of Christmas. If you count from Christmas Day, and the 13th of January. And this is a time in Norway where people have to throw their tree out, because by then it has become brittle and is a fire hazard. So there were ways that we could extend it out, so that it did incorporate that second Yule moon's month, full moon. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it feels like the second month is a little bit more like internal. The gifts are internal. You're celebrating kind of some more things. I know for me personally, like I almost look at, New Year, like the first day of the new year, Gregorian year, that is, as almost a Sabbath, in and of itself, like speaking in witch terms. Like I think of it as a Sabbath of, I want to do things on that day that I want to carry with me throughout the year. So maybe, if I'm working on a book or a writing project, I want to make sure that I spend at least a little bit of time writing that day. Or, if I want to do more cooking, like I want to make sure that I cook dinner that day, or do yoga, or like whatever it is that I'm kind of committing myself to and that I want to bring more into the next year. Like I just really make sure to be kind of conscious of how I use that energy of that like new day forming. And that's just like a personal gnosis thing. That's not something I found in any other traditions necessarily, but I think that it's useful to think of things like that when people are trying to figure out, okay, how I'm pagan, how do I want to celebrate all of these different winter holidays? How do I want to celebrate, all of this stuff? I think that, it's totally okay to...
and if you put Yule on the solstice, January 1st is 12th night.
Oh, yeah.
So it does it wraps that piece up as well. I think it's...
Yeah.
In the Christian calendar of 12th night being on the 6th of January is where we take the wassailing, or the wassail, we take the out to the orchard, we wassail the orchard to make sure that the fruit trees have had their little blot. We wassail the house, which is to go from house to house, and wassail the hall, which is to go into the main farmer's house. And that's where the bring us some figgy pudding comes from. So like this idea that you go around to and you bless, it becomes the blessing of the whole community, from the orchard to the main house, so that's a really sort of sweet one. Yeah, I agree with you that it's important to make things that are meaningful to you. If you can reach down into your own root culture piece and learn maybe one recipe that your ancestors might have might have had. There's a great book from the Frugal Gourmet, Cooks with Our Immigrant Ancestors, and he goes through all these, everything from Persia to goes through all the immigrant ancestors that he Thai and Scandinavian, all these different ones, and has recipes. So I think that's a really cool thing to do, to honor our ancestors by making something that they might have made. And then there's another really cool resource called Folk Songs of Another America, which was a compilation of Smithsonian recordings that were done during the Depression, when they sent out people to record folk songs. And it's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You can look that up, and you can find folk songs from all these different immigrant groups that are in language dialects that don't even exist anymore. And so you can hear something that your ancestors might have heard. So I think finding a root culture piece at this time of year, especially since really this time of year is so prevalently around ancestor pieces, I think that in and of itself could be a wonderful ritual for people to do, just no matter what, whether you're practicing paganisms or Christian or anything, or nothing. Honoring our ancestors is always a good plan. Figuring out, getting in their language, getting in their food, just a little something. And if people don't know who their ancestors are, just look at your last name and figure it out. Figure out what your last names mean.
Yeah, or think about, your community too. So if you don't know your ancestors, but you're from like Minnesota, for example, you could make a tater tot hot dish and say like, okay, this is, the
Midwestern cultural diaspora.
Yeah.
Another good thing for Americans is to figure out whose land we're living on.
Yes.
And then
extremely important.
Go into that piece and see what are those pieces. Storytelling is often like the primary activity in the wintertime for all cultures that live in these northern climates. And so there's some stories, for example, in the Anishinaabe tradition, that are only told during winter and can't be told any other time of the year. So that would be maybe a way of honoring, is just saying, there's going to be some storytelling or I think people should just explore the depth of what the dark times has to offer, because our overculture has been so focused on not the embracing of the darkness and the cold, and not embracing that reality. It's been focused on bringing in all the light. You can bring in all the light, every bit of thing, and all the consumption, and all the, anything to sort of mask seasonal affective disorders that we might be experiencing, rather than going deeper into those pieces and seeing what do these pieces mean? What's the personification of seasonal affective disorder if it isn't Krampus?
Right, or the Wild Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
That restless spirit, or that, that kind of spirit that's afraid. So one last question. I know that we've been talking for a really long time, but there's a whole nother month, I feel like, that we just haven't gotten into yet. So maybe we'll have to do that later. But one last question for you. So for people who are in the Scandinavian or Germanic heathen diaspora here in the States, but are not in northern climates, So let's talk about our heathens who are maybe living in Texas or who are in California or something. How would you recommend people kind of embrace this sort of ancestral understanding that this is the dark time of year, when the dark time of year, it might not look like the dark time of year for them?
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of importance around being in complete darkness, not just from that to gain understanding, but also because our pineal gland requires absolute darkness in order to engage. So I would absolutely suggest that people in the South, in southern climates, get some of these light blocking curtains that can create an absolute darkness, and then just sit in that absolute darkness with a handful of spruce and a single candle, and just sort of inhaling that greenery and just being in that darkness. I think that in and of itself can be a meditative way of engaging not just the pineal gland and the things that the pineal gland does, like regulating our bodies for temperature shifts, but also dream time. Unplugging all of our electronics, having a chunk of time where we just unplug everything and get into the darkness and just really, embracing that darkness, I think is really important. So physiologically, but also in terms of our own ancestral memory, that we hold within our bodies, it can really be sort of a profound thing. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, I think also another thing, obviously, like no matter where you are, you can celebrate your ancestors and celebrate, the dead, or those maybe restless spirits or what have you, in your lineage. And yeah, I don't know, maybe in years when it's safe to travel, like decide to go to maybe, go to a mountain vacation or whatever, if you can manage that, if you live in the South, just to like kind of experience that winter for more than, like a weekend or whatever.
That would be great. I think it, puts those runes of winter into perspective, the ice rune and the hail rune and, the birch rune, those runes that are kind of quintessentially northern circumpolar. It can really put those runes into a different perspective for people living in more temperate climates, to go into those climates and experience those pieces. The reality of losing limbs, fingers, and toes to frostbite is something that I think people should experience. Don't think you want to experience frostbite, but understand, especially, we live in a climate where homelessness is a life and death edge in the winter.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that, so we both live in Minneapolis. There have been a lot of homeless encampments or homeless people who are living in Minnesota. And it's always, finding solutions, giving what you can, working on, like how can you at this time, call your city council member and fight for, like housing resources or something like that, that is kind of that reciprocity, that gift giving, like part of the season is like, how can you, as a person who housed or who has shelter, how can you give back to those communities, I think is really important, both like materially and spiritually right now.
Absolutely. And quite appropriate to the ancient traditions of making sure everybody had a door to latch and mittens to wear, you know.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, this has been so fantastic, Kari. I might, we'll see, we might do like a midsummer sort of answer to this later in the year, to see kind of like what are the midsummer traditions as well. But that won't be for many months yet. We still have a lot of winter to get through before that.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So you are teaching a bunch of classes, if any of this stuff, we like just touched on just like a sliver of your knowledge of these holidays. So I know that you're teaching a ton through Need Fire, via Yule Fest. I think it's like, if you want to attend, they have these, not subscriptions, they have these packages where, you know, you can have all access passes to Yule Fest classes via Need Fire. And even though we've already had the Krampus class, we will, you know, there's so much more yet to come. And I think if you want to attend more than 5, it's a good idea to get a pass.
Yeah, there's a pass that includes 5 classes, and I've taught one out of the 5 I'm teaching. But we also have Maria Kvilhaug and Johannes Skorbeck and everybody, you know, like people from Scandinavia, and Larissa Hunter is doing Mother Night woolworking, spellworking thing, and
I'm teaching a Plan Your Year with Tarot class.
That'll be so fun. Candle dipping, and there's incense making, and there's so much stuff, you guys. This is just going to be so much fun. And I'm just excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be part of it too. So definitely, if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the show notes for this episode. Highly encourage you to check it out.
Yep, and you can check more about my work on my website, which is karitauring.com.
Yes, I will also link to that in the show notes.
Lovely.
So it's easy for folks to find. All right, well, thank you so much, Kari. This has been fantastic.
Well, you're so welcome, and I look forward to seeing you in the Zooms.
And that is it for today's episode of the Heathen's Journey podcast. A huge thank you and shout out to all of my students and patrons for making this work available. If you want to become a patron and support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/northernlightswitch. I post full moon and new moon ritual guides, rune readings for each of the turning of the zodiac season, and so much more. If you would like to follow me in between episodes, you can find me on Instagram at northern.lights.witch or on Twitter at northlightwitch. Until next time, stay weird.